Welcome to the Podcast Editors Mastermind, the show for professional podcast editors, producers, managers, etc., who want to build better businesses and better lives doing what they love. Today, we're diving into one of the most debated topics in our field. Should you post prices on your website? We've gathered a panel of podcast editors with different approaches. Our goal is to help you think through the pros and the cons, and more importantly, the why behind your pricing strategy, so you can attract the right clients, avoid endless tire kickers, and still have the flexibility to tailor your services. I'm Mark Deal, and as always, I'm joined by Steve Stewart. Steve, who do we have joining us today?
We have got the St. Louis podfather, Mike Wilkerson, who you can find at twoguystalking.com. Mike's been podcasting it's been 20 years now, hasn't it?
It is. It's 20 years September. Mm-hmm.
Man, you've got to have a pile of cables and microphones and everything just stuck in the corners of your office there, don't you?
They're in cases, Steve, for sure.
And coming back to the show, Matthew Bliss from mbpod.com. Thanks for coming back, Matthew.
Always happy to come back. Thanks for having me.
What time zone is it for you now?
GMT +1 or BST, depending on if you're in Britain or Ireland. But yeah, I'm well in front, behind, in front.
You're in front, yeah, by quite a few hours from where we are. Not that makes any difference in this topic for today. We're going to talk about something that Matthew gave a really cool title to, is visible pricing. I love that idea of visible pricing, because when I go places, I want to see what it's going to cost me before I start the process of signing up or doing anything. But there's pros and cons to that. I've debated doing that myself. Let me start with Matthew. Do you do visible pricing on your website?
At this stage, I don't. I am in the planning stages of doing so. But unfortunately, with the way that I've learned about how visible pricing can be a benefit to me, I haven't wanted any more clients yet. So it hasn't been a benefit, which is a nice problem to have, I know. But I haven't wanted to put it on the website yet because I'm not looking for people who would be attracted by the pricing.
Interesting.
But were I hunting for more, I would absolutely have a starting point on my website today.
Well, I have an argument for you. You should still do that, but I'm going to share it later. Let's go to Mike. Mike, you have visible pricing on your website. And what is the services for? We're talking about the post-production side. I know you do a lot of studio recording. You do a lot of podcasting stuff as well, but let's talk about the post-production side.
Sure. The post-production side is absolutely not. The reason is mostly because we're accommodating a variety of editors, a variety of different skill sets. And to help accommodate that across the service listing, I want to have pricing based on project. And again, 20 years in podcasting now, I've always won by bidding projects based on the project. That almost always gives us a series of meetings and discovery sessions that allow us to jump not only into pricing, but to gauge what it is we're actually talking about in regard to scope of the project, but also then just the propensity for people to pay. Something I think that's missing inside of a discussion like this is there's a difference between, say, a very large organization, say like Western Union, and the cop that retired last week. Should those prices be the same for both of those people? I would say no. It depends on the service listing. But that not having the visible pricing, just to be very candid, it allows us to make some good, solid pricing decisions that not only foster business, but allow us to find other business.
Mark, I'm a lot like Mike and Matthew in the way that I didn't want to put prices on my site, but I ended up doing it recently. Now, what do you think? I want to know what you think about this whole thing.
Well, first I want to back up a little bit and acknowledge to the people who are listening, why this is such a hot button topic in the podcasting editing community, because this does pop up a lot of times. I know we dived right in, like, do you do this or do you not? But let's all take a moment and think about, for those that are listening, why do you think they're debating whether to post prices or not? I know we've probably seen a few Facebook posts in the Podcast Editors Club about this, but real quick, each person, why do you think they have this conflict before we then get more into, I guess, the way we do things?
I'll jump in first. Go ahead, Steve.
I'll start because I think it's just like what Mike was saying. He wants to have that conversation, and he doesn't want to be tied into specific pricing because every podcast is different. And I totally agree with that. But then I can flip to the other side and say why pricing should be on your website, but I'm not going to go there yet.
I think a lot of people start off with thinking that they should post prices because they're doing research into looking at what other podcast editors, producers, managers, and even podcasting production teams, what they're doing on their websites. And I think a lot of times when they're doing their initial research, the ones that stand out the most are the ones that have the pricing table, because they're looking for what are you doing and how much are you charging. And therefore that's going to inform how I begin, my podcast post-production journey. And I think that's probably why a lot of people think that I should post prices, because I think that stands out a lot in their initial research. The flip side of that, and like you said, Steve, I'll talk more about that later. I think potential clients are doing similar research as well. So the ones with pricing tables may stand out a little bit more. Pros and cons, but we'll get more into that later.
When you guys first started the Podcast Editors Group and Academy, I can remember vividly seeing discussions and listings inside of there that were people that were listing their services on Fiverr. And the context of Fiverr is that for $5, you will get X. And so that's the thing that kind of bugs me about pricing, is that, are you just trying to be the bottom of the barrel so you'll get the business? Or are you offering quality? And again, I know I'm not resting on my laurels, but I am resting on a legacy that I've created over a series of 20 years working with hundreds of people. And all I want to do is I want to give you the same great stuff that you see in our website and in the data core and on YouTube and wherever else we're now publishing. And you too can benefit from that. Are you ready to have a discussion? And if I can't find the people that are willing to say, yes, I absolutely want that, then maybe I'm not the outfit. And so the one is to have the discussion, again, to talk about the scope of what their interest is. Are they the customer that just wants to, and again, Steve, I'm stepping outside of just post-production. Are they just the dude that wants to come in, speak, and leave? Or does that person want to do something else to help foster the cauldron that we're going to start stirring inside of the chemistry set between that client and me? Or all of those are X factors that will build price. And so there is no X price for you to get the same thing that that person's getting. That's kind of why we've steered away from pricing in general. There was an effort last year. I opened up another studio in Chesterfield, which is another suburb of St. Louis. And we chose to post pricing there. And I think it didn't kill us, but it wasn't commensurate to make what I think is a good, solid profit margin. And I always want to be plain about that, is that I'm not in it to only make money, but I'm definitively in it to make money. Nobody goes to work and says, I really do want to squeak by this week. Nobody does that. And so being able to seek out where you can not only find a good solid windfall, but be able to deliver services because you're working with either a larger organization or someone that's more willing to pay. I think that it's venerable to seek that out.
Yeah. And that is really interesting as a jumping off point for what I wanted to say about it, which is like where you're coming from, having a bunch of editors that you can deliver the work to and figuring out the scope and treating it like a project is super interesting. And a lot of freelance editors, solo editors in the space aren't thinking that way because they haven't done that work before, or they're starting on the bottom rung and feel like they can't charge enough. They take on too much work potentially. But the thing that often sticks in their mind when they begin is they don't want to refuse work or have people deny them work, which means the prices don't go on the website. But from a lot of research and work I've been doing with offers and marketing, just with some people I've had the good fortune to collaborate with recently, is that if you're not going to incentivize them with the pricing, then you have to have the other means to be able to incentivize them to do it. Whether it's the quality of the work, a portfolio that you can showcase of previous work you've done, so that it almost becomes impossible to say no just because they don't have a number in front of them, because they can't help but work with you. Sometimes it's 20 years legacy, which is unreal in the podcast space. That's like a golden trophy that no one else can get because you have to spend 20 years doing it. There has to be that other means for you to go about it. But I think people starting out or at the stage where they can't rely on, or they don't feel like they can rely on the quality of their work, they don't want people to say no straight off the bat if their prices are there. And then there's the case of whether it's like a corporate versus a solo versus an indie versus a hobby podcaster. You know, some can pay this much and some can pay this much. And you don't want to refuse the two, but you don't want to bundle them together. So if you can get them close to that discovery conversation you're talking about, then it's a lot easier. But yeah, I think that's why prices aren't on websites usually. They try to lean on the marketing stuff, and some of them get there and some of them don't.
Steve, something that you've mentioned previously that I think really also helps foster all of these discussions, and I'm talking about all of them, is the concept of being willing to ask your client, so what do you think in regard to budget? Because everybody thinks that that's a dirty off-ramp into a piece of a conversation that I think is required. It's definitively not the first thing, but it is where you start. You have to know what at all kind of operating, not only just the capital, but the resources. Is there anybody at your organization or you yourself that's going to be helping us do anything inside of this project? And that's a good thing. Again, the discovery sessions and the efforts to discover is exactly what it sounds like. And it's not a dirty thing. It's a great thing because it helps you start to build what can be viable pricing for whatever you're going to do, whether it's a single person or someone that's been in the game forever or a larger organization.
I think there's a lot of variables that we have to consider when we're talking about this discussion as like, this is how it works or this is how it would work. For example, somebody's just starting out. They might be going on Fiverr because they're trying to get experience, they're trying to get testimonials, trying to get some kind of book of business, although I don't think Fiverr is a consistent book of business when it comes to podcast editing. But they are looking at trying to get something going. And they're going to be putting prices out there. They might even do it on their website. They want to get the business. And they're probably not trying to go for the high quality business client. They're probably looking for the individual podcaster because it's an easier sell. Mm-hmm. And they may not have the skills to be working with a 10-person team company who's got, 8 people putting their fingers in the pot. So they might be more incentivized to put their prices on the website or just someplace like that, saying, hey, I'll do your show for $50 an episode or whatever.
Right. And Steve, I think you and I may have contributed to that behavior because for the last 6 years and running, we've been doing annually a podcast editor rates survey. And really, we just asked a couple of questions and then we dive in a little deeper. We give a standard scope. And again, I realize not everyone's doing a standard scope, but we had to kind of level the bar. Like, how much would you charge for this scope and how long would it take you? And then from there, we did this complicated math called division to come up with an effective hourly rate. But really that was meant to show people, hey, this is the effective rate of their effort. And this should be a starting point. And to Mike's point, we did ask a lot of the, the factors and your point as well, Steve, a lot of the factors such as like, how long have you been editing? How long have you been podcasting? How long have you been editing? And a ton of other questions we've asked over the years. And then we post those. The listener who's listening to this or watching this on YouTube, that's available. That's a free resource that we've never held back because so many people contribute to it, and we've made that available year after year. And we've been able to show how the industry is evolving. And I think because of that, people think, well, I should use this to backtrack into a pricing table. What kind of work do I want to do? How much time do I want to spend on it? So this would be the baseline rate based off of the global average. I've got a couple of factors going for me. We show how those influence the rates. So then they adjust those rates accordingly. And then they're like, you know what? This is perfect for a pricing table. Let me put that up there because they're thinking all inward, which again, if it gets people started, great. But maybe where you start isn't how you need to end. And I'm hoping this discussion will help people explore that.
I think there's a component of also revisiting your pricing. I think there was, I think I've actually been on one of the previous podcast editor masterminds programs to talk not only about firing clients, but also revisiting pricing. The context that something you started 6 years ago should have the same pricing again? No, life and commerce does not work like that. That you happen to get in on a great price originally, it's awesome. And there's something to be said for grandfathered pricing, say for like your cell phone or something cool like that. But something is as broad as the scope of a project. It's why you definitively want to put in some sort of, it's not so much that it's speed bumps, but it's where there are points of what you are doing that can eventually then be shown to a client and go, this is what we've done for you this year. What did you think? Okay, terrific. Well, to do this same stuff and then to evolve, we're going to be doing this pricing as we go forward. Cool. And again, there's nothing dirty about revisiting not only the pricing, but also what you're either giving or, it looks like this piece of what we offered, it's not really doing a whole lot. Did you want to continue that? Again, I think having more conversations, not only with the client, but also the people that might be servicing you as a staff is vital for something like podcast editing. When we talk about a project taking usually between 2 and 4 hours for an hour of audio edit, just in raw form, not focusing on the AI enhancements that are available, which, by the way, is now a question that we have that people have asked us. Are you just using AI tools? Because if you're using those, well, I can use those too. It's something that Brian and I visit regularly over on the podcast Gauntlet because it's one of the myths. Well, if you've got this software, well, you don't need an editor. Yeah, you kind of do.
You do.
And there's only 2 clients that I've had that have chosen to go the AI route. So that also is happening, where because it's so easy, because there is what I think a very effective marketing plan inside of some of the AI-based softwares, you're going to see people drift away because, well, the subscription for that, maybe some of my time, I think I can handle this. And I always look forward to them coming back and saying, you know what, I need some help.
And that's totally okay with me. If they choose to do the AI themselves route, it's almost like, do I watch an NFL game? Do I go to an NFL game? Or do I put the PlayStation 5 with the latest Madden thing on and say, hey, simulate a game for me, right? I mean, technically they're all the same experience, but really are you getting what you want? Talking about evolving pricing and again, using the football analogy. I mean, my son plays football for high school and now my wife and I, we have to, pay for tickets to go watch those games. When he started out in 5th grade, it was a much lower budget affair. We didn't have to buy tickets. And of course, the experience evolved. He got better. The entire team got better. And of course, there's more money involved. I would see the same thing in podcast post-production, whether you're an individual or a team. You're not the same person that you were 6 years ago. And your prices should reflect that.
I want to bring a question to Matthew because I think it's going to be a jumping point for the next point in this discussion. Matthew, you were saying earlier you don't post your prices on your website because you don't need any more clients right now. Do you think if you posted your prices that actually you'd start getting more clients again? Just because the prices are there?
I think I would have easier conversations. Part of the reason that I was considering putting him on the website, but that was half the story of why I haven't not wanting more clients. I want to kind of pivot the direction of my services a little bit as well. So that's contributed to me not doing it quite yet. But what I've discovered over the last couple of years of doing this, full-time, full scope, this is my full-time job, is that the easier the conversation is with the person on that discovery call that's been talked about, the easier it is for you to land the client. And when I say easier, I'm not just talking about they know whether they want to have the call with you once they know the price because, ooh, that's way out of my budget, or, ooh, that's super cheap. I'm going to give this guy a look. It's more on the side of, okay, this is the starting point. You've valued yourself how you think in the market you should be priced, however you did that. And then they start saying, well, I don't want this bit. So what would that look like if we didn't have this part in your processes? In which case you go, oh, well, if we're not doing that, we could do a few episodes with that, 40% of the pricing that we've got there because it's such little effort. Let's give that a spin and, commit to 10 episodes. Then after that 10, we have the discussion that was brought up before. We're revisiting it now. What do you think of the services? Are you liking the growth? What if you had this and we went full pricing? Would you see more value from that? And invariably, whenever I've turned up to a discovery call and they've said, well, how much do you cost? And I've said, well, how much you got? That doesn't make the conversation easier, Like even if you rock up to the call and say, well, this is my starting point, I've actually found that more clients are comfortable with the certainty into the conversation of what the pricing is. And more than likely, at least with the conversations I've had so far, again, incredibly lucky. I don't not feel that privilege that I've had so far with the networks I've created. But more often than not, they are willing to. And that's why my pricing has slowly gone up and up and up. Not just because the value I drive has gotten better, I've gotten faster. I know what kind of podcasts I can make and the value that gets driven for those clients. But also, the higher you go, where people aren't saying no, go a little bit higher next time if you're still testing that for yourself as a solo freelancer in this space. So that's the long answer there. The short answer is I haven't put them up yet because I'm not quite ready for the editing gig to be 100%. I'd like to go into other services, but they'll be going up there because it's the start of a conversation. It's more than likely that people will pay it. And if they can't, it starts the conversation off and ends it much faster. Like certainty, I say in podcasting these days, certainty for advice is a bad thing, but certainty in these kinds of things, in pricing, is a good thing because everyone knows where they stand. And then you can dial it backwards. You can even dial it up if they ask for a little bit more. Maybe they're happy to commit to you for an entire year and you don't have yearly pricing on your website. And you're like, ooh, okay, that's 12 months of this price. Let's whack 10% off. And, you know, that's a bonus that you can talk about with the potential client that you're talking to.
Steve and Mark, in their effort to try and find what is essentially an annual pricing for what podcast editors are charging, is awesome. The double-edged sword of that, though, is that does that mean that the one-man shop that's starting his shop today needs to also start at that price? And obviously I would say no, mostly probably because you don't have any experience. You've edited something, whether it be your own stuff or you've watched some YouTube videos and now you can put your toe into the water. And so I'm going to start at the largest price. That's not where you would start. The other thing that struck me too is remember the context of budget. How much value is the person that you are either talking to or trying to woo putting into the project? Anybody, regardless of size of organization, it's actually more disappointing when they're larger and they come in and they say, you know, we don't know what the budget is. Wrong answer. I mean, like that, anything that goes in that direction, it doesn't instantly become a great. I'm so grateful that you took the time to come and chat with us today. But if you've not tried to attribute value or what you want to spend in regard to time or effort in regard to the project, how do you expect me to try and bid a project based on where I know I have costs? You clearly do as well. And so what are you as an organization or person willing to attribute in regard to value for the project? And this is where that context of being able to read people, it's why I almost always do discoveries. I love it in person. I just happen to have a studio where I can bring them, but always inside a video because it allows you to read people and it's not just paragraphs. It's not just an email. I know that that's not it's definitively not what most people do anymore, but I love doing that and I almost require it because I want to read the people. I want to know if what I'm talking about is jibing. Do I see some head nodding? Do I see smiles? Do I see a couple of people looking between each other saying, oh my God, how much? All of that is a piece of what enables you to either step on the gas pedal, especially as a salesperson, or as a professional that has a skill set. It allows you to do anything in regard to direction for pricing. And I think that that's a vital piece of the game that I think a lot of people are missing.
Mike, you mentioned something, and I have seen a lot of this rolling around the internet of people asking pre-qualifying questions such as A, what's your annual revenue? And B, what's your budget? Much like you said, what's your budget? If they don't know their budget, then that's a huge red flag. I personally don't feel comfortable asking people, you know, what's your annual revenue? What's your budget? For the flip side of that, that's why I don't post pricing tables. My theory is I'll put pricing tables up if all the information you need to engage is there on the page and in the table, and then you click and then bam, you're in. I don't need to have a discovery call with you, right? And those are the situations that I use a pricing table. For example, Steve and I run Podcast Editor Academy. If you head over to podcasteditoracademy.com, you'll see what we've been doing there for the 6+ years, and we've got our pricing table right there. Hopefully that page answers all your questions. look at the various pricing tables. You click, bam, that's what you're getting immediately without a call. Of course, we have contact forms. Sometimes people reach out and ask questions, and I'm not saying take that out altogether. But the reason I bring this up, and I like that you mentioned that, Mike, is if you're thinking of putting a pricing table and you're okay with being, that transparent and limiting, I think, of like, this is what I'll do for this amount of money. Do you also feel comfortable having the conversation of like, what's your budget? And yeah, people don't know what their budget is. That is a huge red flag. A lot of times when I ask that question and they don't know, I flip it around and then say, all right, well, what is your budget for social media? What's your budget for marketing overall? What's your budget for social media and going to conferences, right? Because I can frame podcasting into like being in a person at a conference, having an exhibit table or collateral for social media, how much time they spend coming up with images and videos and things like that. But if they've got no budget whatsoever, I am probably not the person they should be talking to. In fact, 100%, I'm definitely not the person to talk to. That being said, I don't like asking, Mark, what's your budget?
Yeah, and by the way, Mark, that's not dirty to think that way. That's one of the other things is like, it doesn't mean that you're Scrooge McDuck standing over your pile of gold bullion, counting it, waiting to make sure it doesn't go anywhere else but in your pocket. All that is that it's a business. Again, it's one of those things. Are you actively fostering? Are you helping yourself and your business and your future endeavors by interacting with somebody with the pricing or without the pricing? And I think that the better discovery session definitively happens when it's not present. There's something else that you mentioned too, the analogy to another thing that you do. All of this reminds me very much of when I was a very much involved web designer. And frankly, podcast editing has a lot of the same tethers where traditionally I would come in as the web designer that is the next guy, i.e. things are broken. Everything is, it's all on the floor in pieces and we don't know what happened. And it's because they've either untethered from the niece or the cousin that was doing the website and nobody knows where she went, or they just got ghosted, whatever that is. But the question becomes, what kind of budget did you have for your website? And if the answer is, I don't know, Shelly and her niece were handling it. Okay, wrong answer, right? It is the effort that they're going to be putting into it something that you can bank on as a piece of business, business, or isn't it? And I love that you guys are pioneering this wonderful crafted dust on top of podcast editing, because guys, it is a business. The context of what all of us are talking about usually inside of the groups, unless you're brand new or you've just come over to try and find some software, some plugins or whatever else, is that it's an active business to try and build something that you don't yet have. And so considering all of these things, including your pricing, I think it's super vital inside the discussion.
Yeah, there's just one other aspect that I want to add on top of that. And it's not just podcasting being related to a product like that, where sometimes you're coming in the back end and someone's done some stuff and you have to go in and fix it. But podcasting is one of those unique spaces where it's not like this came to my brain when the subject of the podcasting academy, editor academy came up. It's not the same being a podcast editor as it is offering a complete product. I think some editors do think of it that way. The Fiverr of things makes us think of it that way, where there is an exchange of goods and they can make that request, pricing table, button for that particular section, and then you get it. It's much more of a collaborative effort in terms of the different ways that podcasts work. Like you can't just off the shelf grab an editing thing and then sell that to someone and expect everything to be like good, valuable, deliver on the goals. Again, that discovery conversation is one key aspect of that. You can't off the shelf a discovery conversation. So I think podcast editing is different in that way. You're coming to the table, working on a creative for something that can sometimes have very rigid goals. But podcasts, and podcast editors all enjoy that kind of vague gray space I think, which is exactly why pricing is so hard to come by, and why that pricing survey that you get every year from these lads is kind of handy. It's a good starting point. But there's no official website in the US or any other country. There are a few unions that try to set pricing tables, but it's never standard. And I don't think podcasts are standard either. That's why it ends up that way.
Mark, there was something else you mentioned also in regard to pricing for the Podcast Editors Academy. The difference is there that, see, the value question is still there, though. It's also an investment. Knowing that when the people buy into the Podcast Editors Academy, or frankly, any other subscription service for whatever it is, it's that, are you going to get the perceived value of what you are paying in on it, or aren't you? And I love that, because that's the discussion. Are you willing to pay in anything? Are you willing to pay me $40 for my 4.5 hours of time for this episode? Are you willing to pay your $450 that includes not only the audio, but the video edit, as well as all the wrangling of those assets per month, or whatever the number is? You can have those things there, but if you don't have the bounding box of them having any value, then I think it's folly. I think it's an operating on an X factor rather than operating on something where hopefully how much your time costs, and you want that or more. And so to structure that, there has to be a built-in value statement. And if there's not, that's the easy ripcord, right? I mean, like, we've talked about several questions here where you can, if you hear those phrases, it's time to grab your drink and go, oh, really? That's very interesting. Oh, excellent. Well, I'm so appreciative of your time today. Thank you so much. And again, guys, because it's a business, I want everybody to be nice. I want everybody to make money, but I want everyone, most importantly, to remember it's a business.
Right. And you definitely have to address the value on your website, even before the initial call, because you shouldn't have to be going into an initial client call, sales proposal. We can talk more about that later, and still describing the value. They should know the value before they jump in. So you mentioned bounding things. So I don't use pricing. We use pricing tables for Podcast Editor Academy, and I use pricing tables for things like that. When here's what you get, here's the button to immediately start. We don't need to have a call. Hopefully everything is answered on this page. If not, we will continue to tweak and refine that page as we develop our services, as people join, as people leave, as we do. And there's obviously a contact form there if people have additional questions. But with regard to podcast editing, post-production, what really the gist of what we're talking about today, I do believe that, there should be some bounds. So there's two bounds that I use. One is a minimum engagement pricing, right? So it's not a pricing table. It's basically say, hey, this is what's going to get me out of bed in the morning, right? Also, there is minimal scope. For example, there's things that I do, things that I must do for each and every client to achieve the level of work that I feel comfortable putting my name on. If they don't want that level of work, I am not the podcast editor for them. And yes, those things do cost more money, but I also show the value of those things. If they don't see the value of those things, then they're not the right client for me. I'm not the right podcast editor for them. So for me, it's those two axes of what I play with. What's the minimal pricing engagement, and also for everything, this is what we do. I say we do because work with a small team. It's the minimal of what we do. If that price can fit within your budget and you're okay with having these extra layers of things added on, it's not something I'm going to strip out in order to reduce pricing, then let's have that conversation. And if it starts to go, doesn't seem like it's coming to a resolution, or kind of going off the rails, and then later on in the call, not in a initial contact form, I will ask the question like, well, what's your budget, and what do you want to get out of it? Sometimes they want a podcast, but now in today's day and age, 2025, I know whoever's listening and just heard me say the year is going to take a toast to that. Little inside joke, podcast editor mastermind there. podcast people like, what is a podcast? And I know we've gone back and forth like, the definition of a podcast, but sometimes clients don't really know, or they think, hey, for a podcast, I want this. And it's really just, social media collateral. Like, hey, that's something that either we can provide, or let me point you over to a marketing agency or PR firm that I really enjoy working with. Granted, they're expensive too, because they're the masters in their field. I'm the master in mine. And that's one way of going about it. So just to recap, again, I believe show a minimum, maybe not a pricing table for a concierge, individualized touch point service such as podcast post-production, but have a minimum engagement price that you're excited. If somebody sees that and then they reach out to you, they're probably a little bit warmer lead. And also post some of the scope that you do for each and every client, especially if it's above and beyond what we'll call commodity podcast editors, right? We mentioned Fiverr earlier. They're basically take audio, massage it, and give it back. But if there's things that you do that you must do with every client in order to achieve the level of work that you're happy with, put that up there as well.
A couple things we haven't really gone into is, and this is why, Matthew, I think it'd be interesting if you did decide to post your prices on your site, but I don't think you should. Even though I said earlier, I think you should. This is the world podcasting. The answer is it depends on everything, right?
Can I very quickly justify why I think that you would say that?
Sure.
Tacking on the back of what Mark just said. I think knowing your value, what the value is the important thing. In commodity podcast editing rather, value is I denoise, I compress, I master and loudness and 16 LUFS. And it's a podcast. And they use those terms as if it's, no one else knows what this means, but they're great words. And these are words that people love buying. They buy those words. In this environment, they don't do that anymore. Like you've got your Riversides and your Descripts using phrases like studio quality and AI driven and all of these things that mean different value propositions. What you're doing at the end of looking at your sales page, even if it doesn't have pricing, is a bunch of things that people can buy off the shelf and do themselves. That's probably not the value you're delivering. It's stuff like, we do these things so that you can grow your show, so that you have the highest quality video possible, so that your team collaboratively can achieve these certain things. Like, what is the actual value? Driving and drilling down into that. And that would be the thing that if we're doing what Steve said, and I'm not putting pricing on my website, I'm definitely saying that stuff. Like, it's not just your stock standard list of functional elements that a podcast edit is. It's what you get from me, my value that I bring to you as a podcast editor and producer.
That I think it comes down to not actually saying we have to have our prices on our site or not, but we have to have a well-designed sales page or way to communicate the value, whether it's on a website or if it's elsewhere. Most of my clients come from referrals. That's excellent. Should I be posting prices on my website? I have a reason for that, though I don't think everybody should do it. Because if you're starting out, you might want to try and get some people interested in your services because they found that your listing price is less than other people. And if you're trying to start out and build a book of business, that might be a great way to get going, especially if you're doing this part-time. It's a side hustle, something you really want to do because you're passionate about it, and I hope everybody is. Then posting prices there might work. If you're a great salesperson, though, maybe you shouldn't post any prices on your site because you want to have that conversation, find out exactly what they're looking for, find that happy medium or that agreement where you guys come together and say, okay, maybe these things I don't want. The client says they don't want these certain things, and you offer these other things that are more valuable that maybe aren't even on the website. That sales conversation can really bring the pricing in line for both you and your client. Whereas if you just said, hey, price is starting at $200 an episode, that limits what you can do. Then again, if you've got Mike's got 20 years of experience. I think there's some credibility ingrained in that fact that there's a double-digit number and it begins with a 2 on how long he's been in the space. That knowledge base makes him more valuable. And if he were to price himself, he's limiting what people think his value is on the site. Because I would say more valuable client, a client who's willing to pay more for an expert is rare. But if they want that, they're not going to go to somebody on Fiverr. They're not going to go to that person on Fiverr. They're not going to go to the person saying, "Oh, I'll do your episode for $100 a month," because they're serious. They're like, this podcast has to be, Diary of a CEO production and all that. If I said I put, let's say it's $500 an episode, that's limiting me. And there might be somebody else saying, "Oh, I'll do it for $995 an episode." That Diary of a CEO person is going to go for the $995, or at least have the conversation before they even come to me. Now, one reason why.
Sorry, go ahead. That was something that Matt said that I think also deserves a whole bunch of attention. And when somebody breaks down all of the services, the four of us not only have a context, but we likely know exactly what they're talking about. When someone that goes and buys the maybe $250 or $485 microphone, or a couple of those, and perhaps a mixer, and jacks it into whatever and grabs their friend or coworker or whatever, and makes the program, and they've got this thing that now needs attention. They don't have any idea. And so trying to explain it to them, I kind of equate it to a plumber. Everyone knows why we call a plumber, and everyone thinks that it's because your toilet stopped up. That's not it. It's because you don't want to do thousands of dollars of damage inside of your home. That's why we're calling a plumber. And the value of the plumber is not only the experience, but the fact that he's going in to do it, it will get done, and then you don't have anything to worry about. And by the way, here's your check. And I think that there's huge value to that in understanding that you have a file and I'm going to make it the best file possible so that you have a great podcast. That's the start of the discussion. And then let them ask questions in regard to the LUFs, in regard to the de-essing, in regard to the insert however many thousands of plugins people are now using to do whatever it is that they do. And that's all there, but you've got to have that initial in. And I think the pointing to and having a conversation is far more valuable than having literal pricing that now, again, makes the box that you will operate in for every single person or organization that might come your way.
Well, let's take that one step further. A plumber is a specialty. You could call a handyman to do plumbing stuff, but you're calling the plumber because that's what they do well. And every podcaster is a generalist if they're trying to do all the things themselves. And you're approaching a podcast editor because that is their specialty. So if you can tell them, convince them that you are the plumber they need, and they can save the hours of learning new stuff, going out to generic American hardware store. I'm going to say Bunnings Warehouse, just because I know some Australians listening will recognize that. Going to get that plunger and not being sure if it's going, you get certainty, you get skill, and that value is in that special zone.
And you're not doing it. Let's be plain about podcast editing. I think the four of us love to sit in front of a microphone and chat about insert topic. Doesn't make any difference. We love to do that. You know what most of us don't love doing? Sitting in front of an editing stack for 4 hours. There's a value to it, especially if you get into a project where it makes it worth your while. But it's not what we love, and it's definitively not what people that just want a podcast and don't want to do any of the other work love. And again, I also get back to the plumber. Yes, he is providing a valuable service, but more importantly, you are not doing the damage to your house that you know will happen. You may not know it the first time, but the second time you know it and you know what you do, you instantly pick up the phone and you find somebody that can do it because you should not be doing it. I would equate that almost 100% to plumbing.
Then you got to go to, okay, so if I'm looking for a plumber, what is my experience in finding a plumber? Do I just go to the yellow pages? I'm aging myself there. Is it that I'm looking for the prices listed somewhere and going with the one that seems to fit my budget? Or am I finding the person that seems to show most of the value that I'm looking for in this situation for a podcast editor on their sales page of their website?
I want to go back to the plumbing analogy. As somebody who owns multiple homes and therefore multiple toilets and multiple sinks, I deal with plumbing issues routinely. It seems like I'm changing out a hot water heater on almost an annual basis somewhere. That being said, I rely on multiple plumbers, and there's different criteria I have depending on which plumber I'm going to hire, right? There is the value, and I'll get to why this is going to help podcast editors in a moment. But, there's the value that the plumbers provide. They should be able to do the work correctly. And then you take value and you divide it by the resources that I'm going to commit to it. Most people think that resources means money, which in a lot of cases it does, right? The plumber is going to do this. It's a $3,000 job. You know what? That's cheaper than the plumber it's going to do for the $4,000 job. But also, which ones are easier to work with? There's a particular plumber I know, if I email him pictures, a description of the issue, tenant contact information, he's got it handled. It may not be the cheapest, but the resource as far as like my time and involvement is minimal. I just put money to it. Great. If it's a huge project, like we're ripping out a kitchen or a bathroom, let me talk to multiple plumbers and find out which one is the best for this, because then I have the resource of time that I can leverage to that. Now, this is taking that analogy. This is how podcast editors, producers, and managers can think about this. I'm a reformed engineer. I'm a conversational data scientist. I like to quantify everything to my own fault. But, look at the podcast editor survey results that we do every year. We try to put everything down to a number. I like the concept of numbers, and I think people are comfortable with numbers. They can understand that 2 + 2 = 4. Unless you're a CPA, most of the time that's the thing, right? So people can understand when the math is mathing, right? They understand the maths. And I think a lot of people want to quantify those things. I like the concept of quantification, but I think take that and you need to come up with a qualitative sales page, one that really illustrates the value. Say it's a $1 million value, but you illustrate that with all the qualitative statements on there. Maybe you have a minimal engagement pricing, but then you also talk to the resources. It could be in minimal engagement pricing, but also, do they need to devote a lot of time to this? Do they need to learn a lot? So if they need to spend a lot of money, if they need to spend a lot of their own time, and if they need to learn a lot of new things, that is a lot of resources you're asking a prospective client to commit to this. But if you can just say, your time is going to be minimal because I'm going to handle everything else. You're learning. You don't have to learn as much because I got you covered. Really, all you have to do is record and pay. If that's all it is, then that resource denominator is a little bit lower. So then the overall value looks easier. You don't want to have a sales page that's like, it's $1 million value, but it's $1 million effort. And again, I'd like everybody to keep in mind that the resources that their potential clients are committing is both money, their time, and how much more do they have to learn to get caught up. And that's why I think people that offer launch packaging sometimes does better in engaging prospective clients than those that don't. There's now even podcast editors, many who listen to this show are now offering podcast audits, because that's another way to go in and say, hey, you've got a show, but here's how it could be better. It's almost like, the second phase of launching to get your show to the next level.
So much in there that I just want to get stuck into, but I'll keep it short. The one thing that you said there made me think as well that sometimes your pricing can also be considered the value that you're giving. So if you're looking at a page that has all those awesome qualitative statements and illustrates the value, huge, you think Diary of a CEO, okay, this guy's done the editing stuff, and then you charge $50 per episode. I think someone's going to look at that and they're going to go, hang on, I'm getting done here somehow. I don't know. But
True,
yeah. if the monetary value reflects the qualitative value that's being put in there, then I think that's really cool. The other thing, and this is a completely different subject, I think, but when you started talking about allocation of resources and plumbers, you probably if you have houses in different places, you're going to have different plumbers for those purposes. You're not going to have one plumber that you pay to travel from one side of the US to the other side just to be able to do your plumbing because you trust him. I think it's very easy when you begin in podcast editing or any kind of podcast production in this space to feel like every person you talk to is your rival, that you're competing in the space. But sometimes it's beneficial if you know a Mike and Mike's come out of the conversation with someone, you know what, you don't really suit my purposes, but you know what, I know this guy Matt, I think he's going to be able to deal with the project scope that you've outlined there. He may or may not have his prices on his website yet, but I can point him in you at him and have a discovery conversation with him, and I'll even warm him up for you. Like, I'll get him ready for your clientness. Lost the word on that one, but I think that kind of collegiality between podcast editors, knowing where our value sits sometimes, but also knowing what our chief skills are, that not every podcast editor does the same things for the same stuff. Like, there's going to be interview podcast editors and there's going to be sound designers for narrative audio fiction. Sometimes they're separated that way. Not always, but I think when that stuff comes out, it also changes the way that people walk into the conversation of how they value a podcast differently as well. Because if they're walking in and going, I need this tiny little piece in a bigger funnel, it's not important. The rest is important. But if they're not convinced that that tiny little podcast piece is what leads to the rest, or if they don't value that podcast piece enough, then it becomes up to us to convince them. But if they come in convinced, knowing that the podcast is valuable, and this is where it's not really our job to do that, but the same thing that was brought up before, defining a podcast is sometimes the hardest thing in the world. If you just say a podcast, a client could look at the webpage and not know what you're talking about, or have an idea of what they're talking about and be different to yours. But if you can outline that qualitative value, then it makes it easier for that conversation. A couple of random smatterings of thoughts in there. I don't know.
Well, this has been a beautiful conversation. I think we could go for another hour, and I've got some other topics we could bring up. What I'm going to do here is I was talking earlier about why I was going to share why I put prices on my website. I'm going to share that at the end of the episode, use that as a cliffhanger, keep people through to the end, because I want to make sure people realize we had some excellent guests along with us today. You just heard a couple seconds ago, Mr. Matthew Bliss. He's at mbpod.com. And Matthew, you just started another podcast, or is this a replacement, like a rebrand? What is this one you're doing now?
It's a brand new podcast, but it's kind of a rebrand. I was previously Coffee with a Podcaster, but now I've done the project that is what I consider the sum of my life's work in podcasting so far. It's rethinking podcasting. It's a philosophical, Socratic approach to thinking about the podcast industry with a mind to helping other podcasters reflect on the advice they hear and how they can make decisions to create their own podcast philosophy. So
legit.
Rethinkingpodcasting.com.
When I go search for that, do I have to put the colon between the re and the thinking, or is it dash, or is it just rethinking one word?
No colon for anything except the cover art at this stage. I don't know search-wise whether the colon helps me or not. But
the colon always helps you.
But we're just talking about plumbing, right? The podcast Rethinking by Adam Grant is kind of where I drafted off making that decision. So rethinking podcasting, no colon for searchability, specifically the website, but re-colon thinking in the name was meant to be like regarding thinking, like you're replying to an email regarding this subject. It was meant to be a little play on words. Just doesn't work with the search stuff. But yeah, that's my new project.
I love hanging out with intelligent people like you. Speaking of intelligent people, Mr. Mike Wilkerson, who has the dialect of an artist. Everybody can find you at the number 2 guystalking.com. What's your favorite production you're working on right now?
I've got to tell you, one that I find not only a passion project, but one that events and gatherings like this one help propel it, is the podcast Gauntlet. It's also probably the one that most people listening to this program are probably going to get the most value out of. The Podcast Gauntlet is something that I conceived now a little over 3 years ago now. And the context is there are so many myths inside of podcasting that you must do or you will fail inside of podcasting. Well, the Podcast Gauntlet throws down the gauntlet. We discuss, we rise, and then shine in podcasting. And I hope that you'll go check it out over at podcastgauntlet.com. My co-host is Brian Ensminger, whom I know all of you know. And the chemistry set that Brian and I have crafted over there it's magical. And like so many things inside of Two Guys Talking to Them, it fuels me.
Yeah. Brian Ensminger is another one of those brilliant, intelligent people. And one more, Mr. Mark Deal. You know what? The reason why I got together with Mark Deal, he was always spinning little dials in the podcasting space. And he spun a dial over here. I don't even know what you're working on now. You've always got your fingers in something. What are you doing?
Actually, lately, I'm working with a fellow Podcast Editor Academy member, and we are doing a documentary style podcast. And I have done many episodes of solo and interview and panel based podcasts, but this is my first foray into a documentary style podcast, and it's called Habitat, Heart, Hammer, and Home, and it's going to be released in a couple months, and I'm pretty excited about it. It's something different than I have ever done in the past. I've always wanted to do a documentary style podcast. I think intellectually I appreciated the amount of work that went into it, but now that I am knee deep, neck deep, overhead deep into it, I now realize how much work is involved in a documentary style show. That being said, it's a lot easier now than it was a few years ago because of AI tools, but still, it's a lot of work. So that's what I'm working on now, Steve. I'm working on a new show with another fellow Podcast Editor Academy member. It's called Habitat, Heart, Hammer, and Home. And it's going to be released in a couple weeks.
And of course, we'll have all the links to all of these things in the show notes at podcasteditorsmastermind.com. I hope everybody who's listening or watching this got ideas for why they should or should not put the prices on the website and how to do a better job at it with whichever way they go.
I know I did, Steve. A huge thanks to our panel for sharing their experiences and strategies today. I invite the listener, if they got value from this conversation, just imagine what you'd get if you're part of a private community of podcast post-production professionals, where we share real numbers, swap proposals, and refine businesses models together. That's exactly what we do inside of Podcast Editor Academy. You'll get access to proposal frameworks, the sales scripts that Steve loves, and candid member discussions that you simply won't find in public forums, such as the Podcast Editor Club. It's where you can work out your own approach to pricing and input from people who've been there. Check out podcasteditorsacademy.com and join us. Until next time, keep editing, keep learning, and keep building your business.
All right, I'm back to give you 2 reasons why I did post prices to my website here in 2025 when for 8 years I hadn't posted them at all. All of my conversations were how I came up with, well, I had a base rate, and I usually had that as part of my proposal, but I wasn't publicly posting those. I was waiting to have that conversation with the person who wanted to work with me. But now that I'm in a time frame of my business where it's like, I don't need to land random clients. In fact, I have a very special niche that I like to serve. So why post prices to my website when I want to have that conversation with the person first? I have much more of a relationship with people before and after that I start working with them. So I posted prices on my website for 2 reasons. And the first one, here's the lesson for number 1, is price equals perception. When I posted prices to my website, I raised them 30 to 45% more than what my regular rates would have been. And I did that 3 pricing tier, or the one in the middle is the one I wanted everybody to sign up for. But the one where I was doing things that I wasn't necessarily excited about doing, like real high video quality, video editing, that was a high tier price. I was like, you pay me this, okay, I'll do it. But I really want this one. I want you in this module here. And there's one that was a little bit cheaper than that. But those prices were posted and they were 30 to 45% higher than what I was actually quoting people when we did have that conversation. And the reason for that was, remember, price equals perception. I want to see if I could get clients who would see those prices and sign up with me and not have to barter and things like that. Although I would barter, absolutely. And I did get a couple of clients that way. They said, okay, we went to your website, we saw the prices, Everything looks good. And I was like, okay, deal. Which makes me think I need to raise my rates on my existing clients as well. Which leads me to the second one. Perception equals continuation. It's kind of a weird analogy, but I had the prices there so that if my existing clients were looking at what I posted on my pricing page, they'll see that they're getting a great deal. They didn't know that I inflated those prices as an experiment, and they might be thinking they're getting a great deal, which seems kind of manipulative to me. That's one of the reasons why I might take the prices down. But they are already existing clients. They're already at these certain rates, and they tick up every year or so. And we have those discussions before we actually raise the rates. But it might incentivize them to stick with me. So there's another reason for it there, is that perception might help keep clients who are working with me. Because like, oh, I'm getting a good deal now. Steve's here, and the perception, price equals perception. Is at work there too. So those are the reasons why I put prices on my website. It did seem to work. Of course, I don't know if my existing clients are seeing those and saying, oh, I need to stick with Steve because I'm getting a deal. But then again, if I do raise my rates over time and I don't raise them to those inflated posted rates, then they're going to feel more valued as an existing client. I like that. It makes them feel good, makes me feel good too. Those are the couple reasons why I posted prices to my website. How about you? What have you found about posting prices to your website? Or are you absolutely against it like I was for 8 years and you're going to continue that way, which is exactly how some of us need to be running our businesses. Let's have those conversations. Let's work out a special deal for this person because they want those things. Maybe your business is more complicated where you have all these a la carte type of options, and just to put them all on your website, it's like the toothpaste aisle. 40 different brands of toothpaste. Which one do you pick? You don't need to be making the confusing argument there. So Mark and I would be interested to hear what you think. Leave comments below the video if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening, hey, send us a comment. Go to podcasteditoracademy.com and just click on that button to contact us. Send us a note. We'd love to hear it. Or, of course, let's hang out and talk about things like this in the Podcast Editor Facebook group, the Podcast Editors Club. That's where we've got some great discussions going on. We appreciate you being here. And as Mark Deal says, keep editing, keep learning, and keep building your business.